But because as a kid, growing up with an audience, I'd simply learned that I was the type of comic that if I laughed at what I did, the audience didn't.
In the golden age of silent cinema, there was one man who didn't need words or even a smile to make the world laugh. A man whose stone-faced expression became his greatest weapon. His name was Buster Keaton. He was called the Great Stoneface, a performer who turned danger into comedy and accidents into art. But behind that expressionless mask lay a life filled with risk, heartbreak, and more than a little Hollywood gossip. How did a boy from a vaudeville family grow up to defy death for laughs? Why did Hollywood once label him a genius and later cast him aside? And what secrets did he carry as he stared blankly into the camera while his world behind the scenes was crumbling? Today we dive into the incredible, unbelievable, and sometimes shocking story of Buster Keaton, the man who never smiled, but made the whole world laugh. Childhood and early life. Buster Keaton wasn't born into Hollywood, he was born into chaos. Joseph Frank Keaton came into the world in 1895 in a small town in Kansas, but from the very start, his life was far from ordinary. His parents were vaudeville performers, a rough-and-tumble world of traveling shows, cheap theaters, and dangerous stunts. And little Joe, barely out of diapers, was thrown right into the act. Literally, his father, Joe Keaton, was known for a violent slapstick routine. And the story goes, some call it truth, others call it gossip, that baby Buster was used as a prop. His father would pick him up, toss him across the stage, and let him crash into scenery to the roaring laughter of audiences. But here's the shocking part. Buster didn't just survive it, he thrived. Audiences loved the little boy who seemed indestructible. Harry Houdini, the great magician himself, allegedly gave him the nickname Buster after watching him take a tumble down the stairs without a single tear. A nickname that stuck and would soon define him. Yet, behind the laughs, there were whispers. Was Joe Keaton too rough on his son? Was young Buster being exploited? The gossip columns years later would call his childhood borderline abuse masked as comedy. But for Buster, this was training. Every fall, every toss, every crash was shaping the man who would later risk his life for art. By the age of 5, Buster wasn't just performing, he was stealing the show. But no one could have predicted that this quiet boy with the blank stare would soon change the face of comedy forever. Rise to fame. By the time Buster Keaton was in his early 20s, he was no longer just the kid from a vaudeville act. He was about to enter the new world of moving pictures, and Hollywood would never be the same. In 1917, fate stepped in. Buster met Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, one of the biggest comedy stars of the time. Arbuckle took a liking to the stone-faced young man and invited him onto a film set. For Buster, it was love at first sight, not with a woman, but with the camera. He quickly realized that here, unlike on stage, every tumble, every gag, every stunt could live forever. And here's where the whispers start. Some said Buster stole the spotlight from Arbuckle. Others claimed Arbuckle resented the attention this quiet kid was getting. But one thing was clear, audiences couldn't take their eyes off Keaton. In front of the camera, Buster was fearless. He leapt off buildings, fought mechanical contraptions, and let walls collapse inches from his body, all while keeping that deadpan expression. People wondered, was he brave? Was he reckless? Or was he just crazy? The gossip around Hollywood was that Keaton had no sense of danger. But the truth was, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was choreographing chaos. Within just a few years, Buster went from being Arbuckle's sidekick to creating his own films. In 1920, he released his first solo short, and by the mid-1920s, he was writing, directing, and starring in some of the most ambitious comedies ever attempted. But with success came rivalry. Hollywood in the 1920s was buzzing with names like Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd. And while Chaplin had charm and Lloyd had optimism, Keaton had something different: danger. The gossip around town was that Chaplin made you smile, but Keaton could make your heart stop. The Great Stoneface was no longer just a nickname, it was a brand. And Buster Keaton was quickly becoming one of the most daring and talked about stars of silent cinema. Peak career and genius. By the mid-1920s, Buster Keaton wasn't just a comedian. He was a legend in the making. This was the era of his greatest films, the works that would secure his place in history. In 1924, he made Sherlock Jr., a film so ahead of its time that critics still call it a masterpiece of visual storytelling. The sequence where he literally jumps into a movie screen left audiences gasping. But here's the gossip. People whispered that Keaton was too obsessed with perfection. He would spend days designing a single stunt, rehearsing it again and again until it looked effortless. Some said he pushed his crew and himself to the edge. And then came The General in 1926, a film many now call one of the greatest movies ever made. Keaton wasn't just acting, he was directing, producing, choreographing, and yes, performing death-defying stunts on a moving train. No stunt doubles, no safety nets, just Buster, a train, and his fearless imagination. The gossip mills in Hollywood had a field day. They said Buster had a death wish. Rumors spread of him breaking bones, barely surviving falls, even cracking his neck once without realizing it until years later. Yet through it all, he kept that same stone face, as if nothing could touch him. Some claimed Keaton's stone-faced act wasn't just comedy, it was his shield. Behind that blank stare, they said, was a man hiding his pain, his exhaustion, and maybe even his fear. But audiences didn't care about the whispers. To them, he was magic, a man who could make a collapsing house fall perfectly around him, and never break character. That single stunt, standing still as a 2-ton house wall dropped around him, became one of the most iconic moments in film history. What the audience didn't know was that if Buster had been off his mark by just a few inches, it would have killed him instantly. No camera trick, no second chance. At his peak, Keaton was unstoppable. Critics hailed him as a genius. Fans worshipped his daring. And gossip columns loved him too, though they often painted him as the comedian who never smiled, a mystery even to those closest to him. But while Buster was conquering the screen, storm clouds were already gathering behind the scenes. Struggles and Hollywood downfall. The 1930s should have been another golden era for Buster Keaton, but instead, they became a period of struggle, heartbreak, and whispered rumors that would follow him for decades. It started with contracts. Keaton, ever the perfectionist, signed with MGM in 1928, hoping for creative freedom. But the studio system had other plans. The gossip in Hollywood was brutal. Studio executives thought Keaton's stunts were too dangerous, his timing too unconventional, and worst of all, his stone face too difficult to market. They boxed him into bland comedies, stripped him of creative control, and mocked him in private memos. Buster's personal life was equally turbulent. Rumors swirled about failed marriages and affairs, some fueled by gossip columns eager to paint him as the tragic genius. Alcohol became a crutch. He struggled to find joy off camera, and the man who once tamed falling houses with effortless precision now struggled to control his own life. Hollywood, which had once worshipped him, now whispered about his decline. Keaton is washed up, the papers claimed. Once a daredevil, now a shadow of his former self. But beneath the gossip, one thing remained true. Keaton's talent was unmatched. He continued to create, even if the studios refused to let him shine. Yet, even in the darkest years, Keaton's spirit never fully broke. Friends said he remained witty, quietly clever, and endlessly inventive. He just no longer had the freedom to show it on the silver screen. His life had become a tragic paradox. The man who risked life and limb for laughter was now trapped by the very system that once celebrated him. This period of hardship would last for decades, but Buster's story was far from over. The world had not seen the last of the Great Stoneface, redemption and legacy. After years of hardship, the 1950s and 60s brought a quiet redemption for Buster Keaton. Though he was no longer the headliner of silent-era Hollywood, a new generation was discovering and celebrating his genius. Television brought him back into the spotlight. Shows like The Ed Sullivan Show introduced him to audiences who had only heard whispers about his legendary stunts. The gossip columns couldn't resist. Headlines proclaimed, "The Great Stoneface returns." Some even hinted that Keaton's talent had always been underrated, and now, at last, the world was paying attention. Film directors of the new Hollywood generation, people like Woody Allen, Martin Scorsese, and Mel Brooks, openly called Keaton their inspiration. Behind the scenes, gossip went further. Some claimed that even Chaplin, long considered Keaton's rival, privately admitted that Buster's physical comedy was unmatched. Though he never regained the superstar status of his youth, Keaton's work endured. Festivals celebrated his films, retrospectives brought him acclaim, and for the first time, he was recognized not just as a stuntman, but as a visionary filmmaker. The man who once risked life and limb for laughs now earned his legacy in admiration and respect. Gossip magazines that once whispered about his failures now praised his artistry. And quietly, Buster Keaton had finally achieved what he had long deserved: the recognition of his genius on his own terms. The Great Stoneface had endured, and the world remembered every tumble, every daring stunt, and every masterpiece he left behind. Closing tribute. Buster Keaton, the man who never smiled, gave the world countless reasons to laugh. He tumbled, he leapt, he defied death, all with that unforgettable stone face. Behind the blank expression was a mind of unparalleled creativity, a heart of quiet courage, and a life of extraordinary highs and crushing lows. Through the gossip, the rumors, and the Hollywood whispers, one truth remained clear: Buster Keaton was a pioneer. He shaped comedy, inspired generations, and proved that artistry can transcend time. His silent films continue to speak louder than words ever could. So next time you see a man fall, rise, and never break character, remember the Great Stoneface, the legend who tamed chaos, who turned danger into laughter, and whose legacy will never fade. He didn't need to smile to make history, he simply made it.